Welcome to another episode of Real Estate Mentor Podcast. I am your host, Jonathan Klunk. Thank you for being here with us today. And we are bringing you another exciting and extremely useful segment. And today we're going to be talking about appraisals. Everything related. This information is so good, you're going to want to listen to this start to finish, maybe even twice. And today we're thrilled to have Jason Ferris, who is a distinguished real estate appraiser from Louisville, Kentucky, but he is certified to do business in Kentucky, Ohio, and Indiana with a wealth of experience. And he also has both an MAI and SRA highly coveted designations from the Appraisal Institute. He is the owner of Bell Ferris, Inc., a local appraisal company, and provides expert valuations for both residential and commercial properties. Jason has been on the pod before, and he's actually our most downloaded guest. So we are very happy to have him back. Jason, welcome to the podcast. Welcome back, I should say.
Well, thank you for such a wonderful introduction. Thank you.
Of course. I wrote everything you wrote for me. No, I'm kidding. So appraisals, they can really make or break a real estate transaction. If you've been through one as a buyer or as a seller or as an agent, if you're out there listening, it is the only time that none of those people have any control of the transaction. And we're just literally holding our breath and hoping for the best. Appraisers have a lot of power in the transaction, and all parties are really beholden to their opinion. So needless to say, they are an important part of every financed transaction. Jason, let's start with what I've always thought to be true. Are appraisals both art and science?
That's a good question. I would say that appraisals are an objective measure of the market. If we say subjective, then we're saying really just opinion. And if we say objective, then we're saying educated analysis based on experience, facts, that sort of thing. So I think that appraisers get better over time. If I think back to the first appraisals I did, probably in 2003 and 2004, my level of analysis or my level of understanding of the market isn't where it is now after 20 years of doing this. So I think it is a good combination of experience and art, and then making sure that you understand the assignment. That's a pitfall some appraisers have, is not understanding what their role is. Our role is not to make the contract price if it's a purchase. Our role is to provide an opinion of value based on an effective date, which is typically the day we walk through the property, so that whoever might be lending on that property or buying that property has confidence in that number. So that's really what our role is.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned contract value. It's very interesting. I would say a majority of appraisals, thank God, do come in like right at or very close to that contract amount. So I guess that does say something for, buyers and sellers agents and the advice that they're giving their clients, that they do a pretty good job overall of trying to pinpoint what that appraised value or market value is for a property.
I think it really starts with the listing agent doing their analysis. So when they're pulling their CMA, that they are really looking at what's available on the market and what has sold recently, and appropriately pricing that property so that it sells in a reasonable amount of time. And that time has certainly changed over the last few years. And I think now we're talking about, probably wanting to sell a property within a few weeks. It didn't used to always be that way, but if the CMA is accurate, then generally it will flow smoothly after that, because the appraiser is then looking at the same data when they're researching the property, and it should fall in line. One thing that I've always felt is interesting is that there is actually a requirement that appraisers see the contract and any listing history of the subject property. And for many years, I thought, oh, well, appraisers are owed that information. We should know it because it's a good measure of what buyers and sellers are. In all actuality, I think if appraisers were not provided with the listing information in the contract price, our economy would grind to a halt within a day or two. because you would have
Really?
so many transactions that might have to get renegotiated. And what ends up happening is, let's say that I go see a property. It's listed for 279.9 and there's a contract on it for 257. All right. And then
Hmm.
I'm going to pull my comparable properties and I do all my adjustments and all my secret appraiser math. And then I come out to a range of 255 to 260 on my at the bottom
Hmm.
of my grid. And at that point, then it would be reasonable to conclude to a value of 257. So that's why a lot of the times you'll see that the appraisal price equals the contract price. The thing that I tell my trainees, the appraisers that are coming up in the business, is that if you have a range of 255 to 260 and the contract price is 257, don't put 255 on it, because the market is
Right.
not that sophisticated and we're not that accurate as it's just real estate doesn't work that way.
I've had to adjust sales by like $2,000
Right.
because the appraisal came in like that much short.
Yeah, it would be silly and arrogant to do that. So generally, if we are above or below the contract price, which happens, it's going to be a significant amount, because that means that we differ in our opinion about the property, or we see some sort of issue with the property, or we think that it's a really good product for the market. So you'll see that generally the appraisal price is very close to the contract price, or it's
Hmm.
vastly different. And it's not usually a little bit off. So if that helps kind of give some real world explanation to how it works.
Yeah.
So
Now that makes sense. I appreciate it. And one more question, kind of along these lines, before we get into the meat of what I want to talk about today. Obviously, year over year since the pandemic started, we are having record sale prices. And I think that, a lot of this is supply and demand, which may or may not have a direct application to the appraisal. I mean, I do see a line on the appraisal kind of, for the inventory that's available and all of that. And maybe that factors into the algorithm. But how are appraisers keeping up with the surge in property values? Because it could be a month over month or year over year basis. And I'm sure you're not going through training to accommodate for that. So, what are the market factors that are allowing these appraisals to keep up with the pace of the real estate price increases?
that's a really good question. And I would say that I learned how to do that during the subprime meltdown that really started in '07, and then we started to really see the impact on prices in '08. And what I tell my appraisers is that if you're not sure, then pull listings. We put sales and listings on an appraisal report. Most of the
Hmm.
time, people are used to just seeing sales, but in a
Right.
dynamic market, if it's going up or if it's going down, always pull your sales and then pull listings, because that will tell you the direction that everything's going. Because remember, an appraisal is essentially looking back in time in order to put a present value on a property. So, an everyday house in a subdivision, just a regular neighborhood house, we're looking at sales that are preferably within 3 months of the effective date.
Hmm.
Generally, it's within 6 months, especially with the volume of sales down now. Sometimes we're
Yeah.
back 12 months or 18 months. But there is a way to look and say, okay, let's take our example again. Your house is listed for 279.9. You're under contract for 255, and you're looking at your prior sales are 280, 275, and 270. But then you pull listings and they're at 280, 275, 265. That tells you that the market is either flattening out or starting to decline a little bit, because
Hmm.
generally realtors are a very good indicator of what's happening in the market, because they're talking to buyers and sellers every day. If you ever met an appraiser, you know that we don't want to talk to anybody. We're loners and we just want to be left alone at our desks. But so if you talk to agents on a regular basis, which I do, and you're looking at not only your past sales but also your listings, because that gives you a little bit of forecast, you will be
Hmm.
able to effectively nail the value.
Right. Because I mean, you made an excellent point that with the market flattening out, just as prices are increasing, the inverse of that is at some point they may start to decrease. And so the appraiser will have to take all of that into consideration. So that's where the current listings, I guess, would, come into play there. And of course, time on market for those listings. Maybe that particular house is
Right.
overpriced. And so it's been on the market for 30, 45 days and hasn't been under contract yet. Because obviously, having a contract that is canceled, that can add to the time on market, unfortunately. But yeah, great insight there. Answered all of my questions. And, just as promised, when I said that there's something in this episode for everybody, we are going to be talking about homeowners and what you can do to increase the value of your property. We are going to talk about flippers, people who purchase properties, rehab them usually in about 12 months or less, and put them back on the market for a profit. And then also for multifamily investors as well. So, starting with homeowners, I like to describe improvements that are made as either sexy or not sexy. It's the stuff that you see or it's the stuff that you don't. Obviously, the stuff you don't see, that writing that check hurts a lot harder than for painting, for a kitchen remodel, wallpaper, something like that. So, taking a look at our homeowners today, how can they deliver the highest return on investment with improvements that they want to make to their home? And when do you recommend that they make those kind of in the ownership cycle? I always tell people as early as possible so you have plenty of time to enjoy and appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I know that my wife and I are continual rehabbers. We've renovated every home that we've ever been in, and we're never done until right before we list it. And we've discussed that many times, so why that is, but it's because we do projects along the way. But I would say that if you can do the remodeling before you move in, a lot of
Mm,
people are not in that position to do. I know I wouldn't be
right.
able to buy a house and then wait 6 months while all the contractors went in and fixed it. I mean, we all generally have to sell a house and move into the next house. But I think you're
Yeah.
right. If you're going to do the pretty stuff, because I don't know if I've ever used the word sexy in anything having to do with real estate appraisals before. But yeah, so any of the pretty stuff, the cosmetic stuff, I think you want to kind of do that right away. But I will say you shouldn't buy a house without a home inspection. That's just my personal preference. I know when I go to sell my house, I actually get a home inspection so that I can have a third party objective view of everything that's wrong. And then I will go down that
Yes.
punch list and then I will leave that inspection right on the table so that when people come in,
Hmm.
they know that I've done the inspection and done the repairs. And then if they have an inspection, which they should, hopefully that, it shows that those things have been done. But
Highly recommend that. And sometimes in competitive situations, it can give someone confidence to go ahead and waive the inspection if that will make their offer stronger and they really want to be competitive.
yeah, I think if you're going to waive the inspection, I think you should be a pretty experienced property owner. There's kind of two categories that scare most people, and that's structural issues or mold. And mold really got hyped on all of the HGTV shows from the last 15 years, and I think people are starting to get a little used to that, and they realize it's somewhat of an easy fix. Versus the
Yeah.
catastrophe that it's advertised. But structural issues, I think, are not for the faint of heart. So if you're an experienced property owner and you're going to be calling Ramjack or whoever to come in or Be Dry to come in and fix your basement, I think you're okay to
Hmm.
maybe waive. But I'm always a fan of, if someone's not going to wait to sell their property because you want to do an inspection, that might be a flag. Um,
Yeah.
and but I've not had to deal personally with the multiple offer situations and the pressure that's on to make an attractive offer in a multiple
Hmm.
bid situation. So I admit I don't have personal experience with that, but I would say that any of the deficiencies in a property have to be fixed. So I know we were talking before the podcast a little bit about kind of structure. Well, I'm going to go to the top of the building, and that's the roof. So if the roof is bad, everything else is going to be bad. Water intrusion is the biggest damage you can do to a house over time. Obviously,
Hmm.
fire would destroy it immediately, but over time, water is the number one destroyer of homes. So you've got to fix those items, and that's generally the envelope of the house. That's going to be the roof, siding, windows, and then your structure, below.
Yeah. And it gets down to the nitty gritty as well with the roof. The gutters, the downspouts, are they diverting water away from the structure?
Absolutely.
Is the drip edge there? You would not believe how much missing drip edge there is.
Oh, drip edge. And then I'll see that the whoever comes and mows the grass has knocked off the elbow at the bottom of the downspout. And
Hmm.
so the water's just pouring down against the foundation. So it's kind of crazy because all the work has been done with the gutters and the downspouts to pull that water away, and then it's being diverted right at the foundation. So
Yeah.
you've got to get that water away from the home.
And so when it comes to those improvements that we're wanting to make, what are some that are going to give today's homeowner the highest return on investment?
Mhm. I think that the answer is what everybody thinks it is, and that's kitchens and baths. That still holds true. Sometimes those rules of thumb don't always play out, but I have seen that those are the items that people want to be done when they're buying a house because you have to use a kitchen and bathrooms every single day.
Hmm.
You can paint a bedroom and move the furniture out, and it doesn't disrupt your life too bad. But if you don't have a kitchen, or you don't have bathrooms, or everyone's got to share one bathroom because the hall bath is being remodeled, that's a real pain. So
Yeah.
people really value those things being fixed. But I will say, a lot of times I will go into homes where there's been a 75 or $100,000 kitchen renovation, and then
Hmm.
the 1968 wallpaper is still in the foyer and going down the hallway, and the bedrooms haven't really been painted, and you've got kind of dated flooring. So that 75 or $100,000 renovation is not going to give you the return because the overall condition of the property is not consistent.
You have to allocate those budget resources kind of equally. The entire house has to be up to the standard of those kitchens and bathrooms to be able to maximize the value.
Yeah, it's the same as having, a really wonderful interior of the property, but when someone pulls up and you've got, weeds in the landscaping and the bushes haven't been trimmed and it just looks like it's not well maintained, you're kind of dead in the water right there. So,
Hmm.
curb appeal is still important. That's why it's still talked about on all the shows because it's your first impression. Even though everyone is searching for properties online now as opposed to driving around like in the old days, then their first impression, I think, really is still set when they pull up because that's the actual experience. The
Yeah, the curb appeal.
Yeah, it is. I think it's still very important. And then when you're walking through the property, is it as you would expect it to be? So if I come in and I see a renovated kitchen, that means that the bathrooms should at least be updated. They don't have to be renovated, but they should be updated
Hmm.
and a consistent feel throughout the house.
I agree. And I've heard you tell me in the past that, I've had some low appraisals come in for various things like overdoing the hardscape in the back of the
Right.
house. Somebody invest $100,000. Now, I'd put a conservative estimate of about 60 on it, even though this hardscape was, less than 6 months old. They put flagstone down. They had a fireplace. They had a koi pond. They had a built-in kitchen, and so they said this was $100,000, and I said, okay, here's the value of your house. Maybe we can add 60,000 at the most to compensate for
Mhm.
this. When we got the appraisal back, the appraiser, not you, had given a value of
Mhm.
$15,000. And when I picked my client up off the
Right.
floor first, I called him and I said, "What do you mean? This is obviously six figures." And he said, "This is the nicest one in the
Mhm.
neighborhood." I had nothing to compare it to. So I had to give it the generalized $15,000 in value, which, I mean, we had to make some big concessions. He said, "If you could send me some receipts, I'll see what I can do, but I can't make any promises." So when you talk about renovation versus updating, how can people decide which one is going to be right for them?
So the best advice I think I could give anybody is know your neighborhood. If you are in Mockingbird Gardens or you're in Indian Hill or you're in Norton Commons, look at the listings that are in your neighborhood and look at those consistently over time and see what the market will bear. Because you don't want to be in the position where you are the highest priced property in the neighborhood because I think your realtor is going to tell you we're going to run into appraisal issues because the appraiser is
Hmm.
not able to show that the market has valued this particular item above whatever the market is. So that's where we always have the discussion of cost versus value, right? Swimming pools are obviously the most extreme example I can think of
Mm,
where,
yeah.
yeah, people spend $85,000 for a pool and they've just waited 2.5 years to get it because of demand. And then here comes Mr. Appraiser, and we might put eight or $10,000 on it. Now during COVID,
Oh, I've seen
I,
25.
I, I was going to say now during COVID, it was really popular because now everyone's at
Hmm.
home. They've got their kids home. They need to entertain them. So swimming pools actually became more valuable, and we were adjusting 20, 30, 40,000
Hmm.
dollars because we could see it in the pricing. But after a couple of years, by the end of 22, it kind of went back to its old same as everyone was out and about and buying houses and back to taking vacations
True.
and everything. So yeah, it's
Pool sales are going down. Yeah, and that's a great point too. And I think that that goes to the point that I was mentioning earlier about doing things as early as you can in your home ownership period, so that you have time to depreciate them. Because I think the average in-ground pool right now is somewhere in the high end of what you said, 65, up to 100,000 once you get the landscaping done, the concrete surround around it. And if an appraiser is going to give you 25,000 for that, that is a net loss. So I hope that you had a lot of enjoyment and use out of that pool, because that's a significant loss. It's a no-no. So do pools immediately, or likely don't do them at all if you're in certain markets. There are probably some people listening to us in more major markets, and you're talking about $250,000 properties, and Louisville might be looking like a pretty good investment for them right
mhm.
now to come in and take advantage of our lower cost of living here. But a lot of these principles will extend to, any market, because appraisers generally appraise using the same methodology,
Yeah,
correct?
I mean, it is, we are simply reporting what the market is showing. The great thing about this country and the great thing about residential real estate is it's basically a near perfect supply and demand exercise. The market corrects, and I'm talking about the residential market. The residential market will correct. If you're overpriced, it
Hmm.
won't sell. If you are in a seller's market and you are the only house to sell, it might sell for higher. It really is a great review of how economics works. So if we remember back to college or whatever course,
Macroeconomics.
it was that supply and demand, and you thought, gosh, this would be really great if it worked that way. But residential real estate is really good, and that's why MLS is so valuable because you have
Yes.
multiple inputs of all these experts in the field every day. It's really, really a
Hmm.
cool thing to see.
You're exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, going to go back to the swimming pools. We just appraised about a $2.7 million new construction property, and the line item for the budget on the line item in the budget for the pool and the hardscape surrounding it was $325,000, and it was not a giant pool. That is just a reflection of labor going up, costs going up on materials, and it was, it just shocking, I think, for me to see that. So yeah, these numbers have kind of gone beyond what we're all used to talking about in a everyday basis. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's 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 kind of crazy on some of these.
And I think that that's another good point as well. Let's dive into that. The splurges that people make on the property of things that they can't take with them. Obviously, if you put up designer light fixtures, you could always say the light fixtures will not convey because those can be removed, or you can replace them before listing the property with something less expensive. Wallpaper you can't take, designer tile you can't take, the custom kitchens, all of that stuff. How should people address wanting, really nice things in their house, but not losing out when it comes time to sell and they get that appraisal?
Yeah, I mean, some things I think you just have to say are for me. So for instance,
Hmm.
I want an espresso machine, one of those $4,000 or $5,000 units that up in our primary bedroom. So that would probably cost
That'd be
me eight or
nice.
$10,000. I'm not going to get one, by the way. The answer was no when I requested that. But that might be something just for me. Maybe I really love having my coffee in the morning, and it's worth it to me for the average of 7 or 8 years that we all own a home before we move, for me to have that
Hmm.
expense. So to deal with the plumbing and the electric and everything that has to go with it, plus the cost and dealing with all that, maybe that's worth it to me. But I'm going to know that when I go and sell the house, that's going to be a great marketing item, but probably not an item of
Hmm.
value.
And there are a lot of those things. When I'm going to list houses, we specialize in getting properties ready for the market and making smart decisions about it too. You'd be surprised how many people suggest that they take on pretty big ticket items before listing and they ask what that could do to the value. And a lot of times I have to tell them that's really not going to increase the value. It's not going to take you from $500,000 to 510 or
Hmm.
520 because you did this, but it does improve the marketability of the home, meaning less time on market, more eyeballs on it, and more people through the doors, and potentially a competitive offer situation because it is a turnkey, top of the market property in a great location. And those are still going quickly for multiple offers, even while other property types, can sit a little bit longer. That's the state of the market that we're in. People are going to move and have those high interest rates. They want the perfect house. Not to pay, overpay for something that needs some work that they're not absolutely in love with. So, keeping that in mind as well, tell us about some other things, maybe some other areas that might detract from the value. I know that you mentioned finished basements,
Hmm.
and I know building garages might do the same thing. I've seen, $15,000 given in credit on an appraisal for a
Hmm.
garage. What are some other things that people should really look out for when investing their money in their primary residence?
Well, I mean, generally, when I'm walking through a property and I'm trying to think of the things that property owners tell me, because obviously, when I'm walking through a property, if it's a seller, or if it's for a refinance, it's a property owner. They're trying to give me all the positives to the property, and that's fine. The more information that an appraiser has is actually better. We went through a small amount of time when agents didn't think they could talk to the appraisers and all this kind of nonsense, but any
Hmm.
information we get is good, like a home inspection or the information about when the roof was put on. That's all really good information and actually helps us be more accurate. But some of the things that I hear when I'm walking through, and I've kind of already discounted that, is brand names. Until, in my opinion, and I'm sure that people will disagree, but in my opinion, I think until you get into the $2 million range and above, I don't think brand names are as important. I think that, just because it's a Bosch stove versus a high end GE stove, I don't know that if
Or
I
wolf.
can't, yeah, a Wolf range with 10 burners. I mean, that's
Hmm.
great, but if no other property in that price range has that, then that kind of tells you that the market's not really expecting that and probably won't value it. I,
And that appliance could go out tomorrow.
True, true. And I don't know if when we were kids, appliances lasted for 30 years, and
Oh, yeah.
appliances don't last if you get 6 or 8 years out of a dishwasher, you think you hit the lottery. So
My mom had her gas stove for 20 years maybe longer, before I forced her to replace it with
yeah,
something better looking.
right, right. It probably still worked great. And it was
Oh,
probably
yeah.
7,000 pounds, probably too, because it's all galvanized metal. Um,
I didn't move it. I couldn't tell you, but
Yeah,
maybe.
I would say good, good. So I would say that brands tend to get lost in the shuffle. And the same as if someone tells me the name of the designer or the name of the
Hmm.
architect who designed the home. That's all great information, but as far as an appraiser is concerned, it's just not something we're going to be able to quantify in the market.
It's hard to add, a certain amount for novelty because, of course, yeah, there are architects out there who are notable, who have had
Right.
books written about them, and people value those so much. They have a cult like
Hmm.
following, and people will pay whatever they're asking to be in one of these houses within reason. And I mean, I wish that there was a way to put a dollar figure on
Yeah.
that. But you're right, it could be difficult because we don't expect every appraiser who's gone to appraisal school to be up to date on all of this stuff
Yeah.
and, know who these designers are, or spend the time to really go out and research them. Like, I'm just trying to tell you how much your house is worth.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, when we're appraising a piece of real estate, most of the focus is on other pieces of real estate because we're using the
Mhm.
other pieces of real estate and what they sold for to tell us our value. So it's a little bit of a crazy way to think, but yeah, you're really looking at the market to tell you because it will. It's if the appraisers who work for me come to me with a challenge, my first rule is generally okay, go out further in distance or go back farther in time and get more
Mhm.
data because you can start to see trends and patterns the more sales you have. And so, that's, more research and more analysis will generally get you to the answer. I would say another thing that generally gets lost on me is if someone says something is imported, and I
Mhm.
don't know if it's because we're
Everything's imported, isn't it?
well, true, exactly right. But I mean, maybe it's because I grew up in the Midwest or I work in the Midwest, but imported, Italian tile for the foyer doesn't I don't have a way again to quantify that because I don't see that in the market. Whereas, really nice tile from Floor and Decor would probably do the same job. So that
Right.
tends to, get lost on the appraiser as well. So you brought it up earlier, and that's landscaping. Drive up
Mhm.
and down your neighborhood and look at what your neighbors are doing. Go to the barbecues in your neighbors and spy on them and look at their properties and match what the neighborhood has. So if everyone has those poured concrete curbs around the landscaping, then that's probably a good deal. If
Mhm.
everyone has a covered deck or covered patio, then you would probably want to match that. But I would not go crazy on the 500 square foot paver patio with built-in fireplace and pizza oven if your market's not showing that. So and
Right.
that's and I I know as an appraiser that I'm a little bit cold to what is usually someone's biggest investment in their life and the most personal thing
Mhm.
besides their kids that they have in the world is their home. And so we're walking through and it's really just an asset. It's really just square footage, bedrooms and baths. And then, you've got some minor differences after that. But if everything in the neighborhood is capping out at 490,000, then your property's probably not going to be worth 550. You have to look at it impartially, which is how appraisers do. So, because remember,
Of
for the
course.
most part, if we're talking about mortgage lending, which is, the vast amount of residential appraisals are done for either refinances or purchases, then what you're
Mhm.
saying is here's the value of this property. If this borrower defaults on their loan, the bank has to take it back and then resell it. That's what the appraisal is for most of the time. Now, I do quite a bit of private work for estates and litigation and that sort of thing. But you have to realize that when you've defaulted on your mortgage, the bank is not going to necessarily want to recognize that there was imported Italian marble countertops. It's just because they're not going to be able to get that back in the market when they sell it. So that's if we think in terms of the real estate as an asset and not someone's personal home, it gets a little easier to, I guess, get in the mind of the appraiser, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's a good point, to remind everybody that the appraiser generally works for the lender when it is a finance
Mhm.
transaction. And your job is to value the house as it stands in the market. And if these personal updates, the expensive updates that people have made to the home appeals to the buyer, then the buyer has to already be conditioned to realize, hey, this house is probably not going to appraise for the full amount that we are asking or under contract for because it is so nice. It's nicer than the rest of the neighborhood. So if you really want this house, you're going to have to be willing to come out of pocket a little bit more above the appraised value because that doesn't mean that's what the value is. It just means it's what the value is compared to other houses in the area, excluding these certain updates that you just can't account for. And I think that there are situations like that where people are willing to pay more for that, and rightfully so. People who see the value of that and want to live that lifestyle. But last question in this category for you so that we can still go on and address our flippers and our investors and all of that. A lot of people right now are staying put in their houses for longer periods of time because they are locked into very low interest
Mhm.
rates. these people are looking to make updates to their houses as well. What advice do you have for them while they're sitting around? And some of this is sweat equity, some of it they're going to hire out. But what is going to give them, the most enjoyment outside of those kitchens and bathrooms that they could do? Is this a good, should you replace your HVAC system before it completely goes out? Should you change your windows? Windows are something that we haven't talked about. And I wonder what the return on investment is for that for brand new windows. And anything else you recommend?
Yeah, I would say that. So if we're kind of past the major renovation items, windows are good because they do two things. One, they prevent water intrusion, assuming they're installed correctly, which most of them are. And good quality windows will keep out water and reduce your energy bills, which are only increasing every year. So anything you can do
Mhm.
to get your utility bills down is really good. I have seen descriptions in the MLS where the realtors will put in the average LG&E bill. They'll say, "Hey, this is a 320 a month on average for the last 3 years or something." That's an indicator that someone has taken energy efficiency into account. I would say that one overlooked item is lighting, and it's actually a
Okay.
relatively inexpensive thing that you can do for your property. And I know you and I are both used to doing interviews, and I teach online quite a bit. So I have two $12 Amazon LED lights pointed at me right now, and they make a world of difference in how I come across on screen. So lighting, especially now, I mean, let's face it, you can get some pretty decent lighting pretty cheap delivered the next day by Amazon. And I'm not a shill for Amazon or anything, but that is refreshing your lighting is a good impact because it really freshens up the space. Um,
You just talking about replacing existing fixtures or adding can lighting,
yeah, can lighting.
track lighting?
We actually just added can lighting in this room, and they're dimmable LED lights.
It's about 180 each, I think, to install
Yeah,
those,
that's a good.
unless that price has gone
Yeah,
up.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, I bought a 6 pack and we installed four, and the electrician was probably $700. So yeah,
Mhm.
it's a good expense as far as budget and impact, because lighting kind of controls mood. And so if you're in your
Mhm.
property and you can have different mood settings, I know we're starting to get a little off the rails, but and how difficult of a life we have if we have to deal with mood lighting. But it's a good impact. I would say that appliances, if they are starting to get older, I think that new appliances, because generally people use them every day, refrigerators, dishwashers,
Mhm.
ranges, hood, those are you can get some pretty decent quality stuff and not have to break the bank. Lowe's and Home Depot and the big box stores and Menards, I mean, they all have
Costco.
yeah, Costco, good quality stuff. Most of them will deliver and take your old one away and install it. So uh, yeah, that's a good deal, and it just makes you feel better if you got a nice new stove or a nice new refrigerator. Because I did see a statistic, and it's on the internet, so it obviously must be true. Is that the average
No?
person opens their refrigerator 23 times a day? I would hope that I'm opening it less, but probably not. So if you think about you're opening a new refrigerator 20 something times a day, it's got to have some sort of impact on your life, some intrinsic reward. So I would say, and then painting, which we're starting to get up in expense, but painting the walls and the trim. Painting the walls
Mhm.
is fine, but painting the trim actually, I think, has a bigger impact, because it freshens everything up. Because if you really get down and look at your baseboards, they take a beating. They get hit by the vacuum
Yeah.
cleaner, the dog scratches them. The kids come through and
Kids'
yeah.
toys.
So,
Mhm.
that they take a beating too. And then after that, I would say flooring is kind of your next bigger ticket item that can really have an impact on a house. Uh,
Like replacing carpet with LVP or something like that?
yeah. You know, I, I think everyone's kind of got the memo that carpet's got to go, just because allergens. And obviously, we know Louisville is like number one city for allergies. Oh, and then landscaping, just getting out, new mulch, cleaning everything up. re-edging. That's all very inexpensive DIY stuff that anybody can do. Just
Hmm.
if you have vinyl, then power wash it. If you've got a deck or a patio, power wash it. That can freshen things up. And I know it makes me feel better. If I have got, a nice clean walkway that's power washed. Uh,
Yeah.
so
I always tell clients the best way to add marketability to your house, not really value, but marketability is just staying on top of routine
mhm.
maintenance. When you look at a house, it doesn't have to look that nice if it just looks clean and neat and things are trimmed and everything kind of freshly painted. Like you don't have to do a huge remodel, just make it look nice and well
Yep.
kept.
Paint is magic. It really, really is.
It
It's
is
like it's like putting a new surface on something, and it's inexpensive, and most
instant
everybody can do it,
gratification.
so
Yeah.
yeah, that's good.
All good information. And moving on to flippers, I think that there's been this trend, gray everything. Now they're going a little bit towards the grayish, the gray and the beige combined. And I mean, they think that that's really going to wow us and be something incredibly different. But I tell you, there has been nothing more frustrating than seeing a house with light gray walls and gray kitchen cabinets and just weird looking countertop, and then these gray vinyl floors where you could just see the repeat in it, like where which ones match and which ones
Oh yeah.
don't. And then they're not investing where they should. It's like the quality of the craftsmanship is down. And I know that cost is a concern, but quality doesn't always cost a ton more. Sanding the walls before you painting it, spackling certain areas. If the baseboard is just demolished, just replace a little portion of it. What are some of these things that we've been talking about for primary residences that might convert over into flippers that they should really look at the property? If they're taking on a property and they're making their list, creating the budget of what they want to do to it and how they want to sell it, obviously look at the market, see where things are selling. You don't want to be price yourself out of the ballpark if nothing's updated in that area. How do they weigh what to do with the other values in that area as well if they're going for top dollar?
Yeah, I would say you actually hit on number one, which is, know your market and know the pricing in that market. So, again, if you bought a
Work backwards from there.
correct, never work forwards from your price plus your budget. You'll never make any money. And luckily, there's been some good shows that have come out on HGTV that really walk people through that. Egypt Sherrod's show, she's out of Atlanta. She starts with ARV after renovated value, and I'm starting to hear
Hmm.
that term now in the market where people talk about it. So it's really
Yeah.
what we kind of always knew, but we never had a term for it. Well, now there's a term for it. Tarek El Musa's show out in California, he does the same thing. He says, you've got to start where your market pricing is first and then work backwards. And then the second thing that you realize is that you make your money on the buy, not the sale. So, yeah,
Yeah.
so if you buy a $200,000 house and you're going to sell it for 250 after you renovate it, but it costs you 75 to renovate it, your purchase price was too high. It wasn't the budget of, the reno budget. So that's I'm answering a different question than you asked, but I really want to make sure
Hmm.
people understand, if you're going to have an investment property, take your emotions out, look at the market, look at what the market is for renovated properties and what they've sold for in the last 3 to 6 months, and make that your
Hmm.
target number. And then, generally the strategy, and this is more what you do versus what I do, but generally the strategy is, if it's an investment property, price it about 1 to 2% under market and drive those multiple bids. That's a realtor's job, not my job, but that's generally what I see. I can see it when I'm looking at the sales.
I do wish there was a place on MLS where we could select that multiple offers were
Okay.
received to kind of give us a heads up on that. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, that would be really good, because a lot of times appraisers, they don't analyze the sale of the subject. I have never had a situation in 20 years, 21 years now, where a realtor has not gotten back to me. They want that property to sell, and they will call me or
Hmm.
text me back immediately. I would say I don't even think I've ever had someone not call me back within the next day. And I'll call and say, hey, I noticed that this was listed at 249 and you got a contract for 252. Were there multiple bids or whatever? And as that show, the rest of the story will come in that 5 minute phone interview with the realtor. And you'll get that
Hmm.
information. And they'll say, yeah, we had 12 offers within 6 hours, and this was all cash or whatever, made it attractive. And so then you're like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense because the market, again, told you the answer. It was listed for 249.
Yeah,
You had multiple bids come in on the first open house. Well, what's that tell you? Well, it tells you that it was priced a little bit under, and those multiple bids are showing that people want that property and they're willing to pay for it. Because remember,
exactly.
market value is what a typical buyer and a typical seller will agree to after a reasonable marketing period. So if it was a foreclosure and it was only offered for one day, well, that's not market value because it wasn't listed the normal amount of time or exposed to the market is the appropriate term. But so I would say that start with that ARV, work backwards on what you think that you can renovate it for, and then set your purchase price. And then don't get emotional and go over because nothing is going to change just because you really wanted the property. The other the other thing I would say is make sure that you move fast because you can quickly eat up that profit with your monthly holding costs. Because remember,
Oh
you've
yeah.
got to insure it, you've got to pay the debt service on
Hmm.
it or the mortgage payment, and then you have to pay your utility.
High interest only, probably.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, or you can do it. You can do.
Private money.
There are hard money loans. I do appraisals for hard money lenders all the time, where someone's going to go in and do a 3 month. They'll pay 10% interest only. Um, I call it the VIG from the old days of watching The Sopranos, but that's you're paying your 10% interest only to move and get that property renovated and out on the market, and in hopes of never actually making a mortgage payment. But you've also got
Right.
risk because the way that we reflect risk in real estate is capitalization rate, and interest rates are
Hmm.
a portion of capitalization rates. So, high risk means higher interest rate. So, I would say that to be responsible and to be a good steward of our economy and the real estate market, you need to fix the deficiencies in the property, even if you can't see them. So, if there's a structural issue, if the basement's leaking, if you've got a bad roof or something, make sure you fix those things. um, and even if you can't see them, or we were talking about flippers, but if you're an investor and you're going to hold that property to rent, it might not increase your rent, but it will uh, provide a good property for the next owner. um, I'm a believer that you don't want to kind of screw the next buyer just because they might not be
It's bad
experienced.
energy.
Yeah, so um,
Yeah.
and then after that, then you're going to look at, are you going to paint the cabinets versus put new cabinets in? To be honest, granite is now so cheap uh, that you can afford low end granite in these investment houses, no problem. But um, yeah, it's kind of crazy. When it first happened, it used to be the absolute most glamorous thing in a house, and
Hmm.
now we walk through and you're like, granite countertops, no big deal. Uh, but I don't know. Did that answer your question? I wanted to make sure I
Oh
was.
yeah, yeah. I think that that's a good jumping off point because a lot of the pieces that we talked about with the traditional owner occupied properties, that's still going to convey over to the flippers because that's what people are looking for. And you're going to get the same return on your investment whether you own the property or you're rehabbing it to turn around and sell
Mhm.
it. So that's all very good. I think more so the math on how that works out because people can really get in trouble on that side of it. And I've represented properties that people have flipped as well. Some people who live out of state and rely on local people to do a lot of the work. And I'll tell you, some things just don't translate in pictures and videos that they are sending back to the person that there working
Yeah.
for. I'm often brought in and have to walk through properties and send them a list of things that need to be handled. And sometimes I'm horrified. Like, and that's when we have that conversation about budget. And then I have the conversation about quality, that it's one extra step to do something the right way and shouldn't cost that much more. So if you're not working with the right people, then definitely find some different people to work with because couple false moves and that house just
I mean, if you have to pay for 2 electricians to do one job, then yeah, you're starting to eat into your profit. You're not going to get that back because, and I would say obviously pay for what's done, not what you hope will be done or someone promises they will do. Even if you have to pay
Hmm.
someone weekly, you know, have I mean, appraisers go out and do draw inspections all the time on new construction houses. There's no reason if you're out of
Hmm.
town not to pay the appraiser $150 to go out to the house and do a construction draw, take pictures, write down the percentage of things that were done, and submit that back to the homeowner, and then they'll pay the contractors accordingly. So
That's a good
yeah, I
point.
mean, it takes it.
Having that
Yeah,
intermediary.
we're a third party, and it's the homeowner's happy and the contractor's usually unhappy, but that's how you're doing it right. So
Let's wait a few more days. Yeah. Well, moving on to investors, primarily multifamily, because I think that, obviously we're just kind of keeping this a little more
sure.
residential in nature. So, how does approaching multifamily homes differ from single family
Mhm.
investments generally?
Well, now you're talking about a return on your money. So if we're
Hmm.
talking about a home that you own, generally you don't realize any profit until you sell it, right? So, and
Hmm.
we think
Unless it's a single family residence that you have as a rental. And I guess that was probably
right.
more of the conclusion that I was drawing there with that question is if I have a single family portfolio, if I have 7 doors under a single roof, how are these approached differently?
So, an income property is generally valued on its income because we know that the property is not for the owner's use or enjoyment and then to be sold at a profit 25 years from now, but it is to realize a return, and generally that return is every month. So,
Hmm.
and you want to look at a ratio above your debt service. We call it debt coverage ratio. That's a good place for a beginning investor to start because they're usually 99% of the time they're going to be leveraged. And so, you have to look at, okay, what is my monthly payment? And then I need some factor above that for my rental income, my net income, in order to offset any vacancies and risk and that sort of thing. So, most lenders will want you to start at about 1.25 or 1.25 or 1.3 debt coverage ratio, meaning, if you're for simple math, if your mortgage payment's $1,000, then your net rent should be at least $1,250. That's very simple math. That's why interest rates have such a big impact on investment properties, especially for kind of first time investors. Your duplexes and triplexes and your quads or fourplexes, that's generally where most people start investing in real estate because they're the lowest price. Everyone's going to have to come up of between 20 and 30% of the
Down payment,
yeah,
yeah.
so because you're not going to get a 98% FHA loan on an investment property. It's not going to happen. So you're going to have to come up
Yeah.
with 20 or 30% down. And generally that prohibits a lot of people to come up with 30, 40, $60,000 in cash. So the first thing obviously you're going to have to do is everything we talked about. What do I need to fix when I buy the property? Am I going to keep the tenants that are there, or am I going to vacate the property, renovate, and then try to get higher rents? What's
Hmm.
your strategy overall? And remember, if you vacate that unit and you're going to renovate it and it costs 60 days, well, that's now 60 days of rent loss, plus whatever time it takes to lease up, which nowadays is 0 days, but
And the expense, the materials and labor and
sure.
everything as well.
Yeah. Not
Hmm.
only are you, putting money out in order to buy materials and pay for labor, but you are reducing the income that you're getting in. So it's kind of a double whammy. So you have to be
I always do that as people move out. Obviously, if the units are priced below market and you kind of want to encourage some people to move out, then as leases expire, you can start increasing the rent until someone decides that they're going to look elsewhere. And then that's going to be a good time for you to go in and do it and have everything planned out in advance. You said 60 days. Have everybody waiting, all the materials in. I'm going to do tile in the bathroom. Let's go pick it out. Let's have it here. Get your contractor in there. We can probably get it done in less than 30 days. But yeah, excellent point. And that's why I like to buy properties that already have tenants in them.
sure.
Plus, you can talk to the tenants sometimes
Uh-huh.
whenever you walk through and see if there are any issues that haven't been disclosed or people aren't telling you
Oh,
about.
they'll tell you immediately. And when you walk through with the appraiser, they'll tell the appraiser too.
I
They'll say,
know.
this landlord never fixes anything, or this landlord is great. I can
Yeah.
tell, like, let's say that I'm appraising a 300 or 400 unit apartment complex. I can tell within the first 2 units going around with the property manager how well that property is managed. Because if the people are kind of cold, or they don't say anything, or they say, "Hey, I called your office, but no one called back," then you know that management is not great. But if they know the person's name and they're talking about their kids, and, oh, the kid's going to school, that tells you that the property's well managed. So, over time you just start to pick up on these things. So yeah, it's pretty cool, when you're looking at these properties and you see how people manage
Yeah.
them.
So watch for those dynamics buyers when you are looking for your next multifamily
Hmm.
investment. Tell us about the importance of profit and loss statements. First, I mean, I've had this benefit a buyer before. We've had to adjust the price. The appraisal came in lower because of the actual
Hmm.
expenses and income. And that was kind of the primary driver used to come up with the value for this property. And it was more or less than we had offered. So we were able to adjust it. But obviously, this is going to be important. Are we looking at 2 years? Because if we're looking at 2 years, then people who are 2 years out from selling need to work on maximizing their expenses or maximizing their profit, lowering their expenses. But also, what happens if somebody doesn't have a profit and loss to provide to you? Is that a benefit, an advantage, or disadvantage in some
So
cases?
I'll go back to my earlier statement, whereas more information is always better, for the appraiser. So, but I will say, as far as P&Ls go, for a duplex or a triplex or a quad, they really don't have much of an
Yeah.
impact. In fact, if you look at the appraisal form, and I know that you study appraisal forms on the weekends when you're bored, but if
Hmm.
you look
Yeah.
at
Religiously.
a duplex, a triplex, and a quad all go on the same form. It's called a 1025 form. That form does not have anything to do with expenses. It is basically sales comparison, which we're all used to, and a GRM method to get to the value, meaning I take my gross rents times a factor to get to my value. But most
Hmm.
appraisers rely on the sales comparison approach, because there's always this rub between contract rents and market rents, right? If you are
Right.
okay, so if you are managing a property,
The below market
yeah,
rents.
the buyer
Hmm.
is always thinking they're going to get those rents up to market, and this is a value add purchase, right? And then so if they're looking at so if they're buying it based on that, then the net income of that property is probably not going to get you to that sale price, because the difference in those two numbers is the equity gain on a savvy buyer, that they're getting from the
Hmm.
market. I don't know any buyers of multifamily properties that don't think they're going to increase rents. Every single person does. So generally, the buyer will give me a pro forma where they've run all the rents up to market, and then they have their expenses.
Right.
And so that's how,
They'll say if the rents were higher, this is how much it could
right.
net versus what it's doing today over here, which ain't great.
Yeah, but there is some math that you can do in order to get from, okay, we call it stabilized. What's my stabilized value versus my as is value? And one of those
Hmm.
adjustments is rent loss. Okay, so if I vacate this unit and it takes me, and in a crazy world, let's say 30 days. In Louisville, it's about 3 hours to rent an apartment, but let's say it takes you 30 days. Well, that's a direct adjustment you've got to take off for losing that month's rent in order to lease that
Right.
unit up.
What do you use for that number on appraisals? I see 3% average. I see some people use
Oh,
5%.
okay. You're talking about vacancy. So vacancy is, not to get too much in the weeds about how appraisers do math.
Right.
Okay, but
That's my
that's
fault.
okay. But vacancy is basically saying, over the life of the property, what's a reasonable percentage of the amount of months I'm not going to get my money. So, and there's
Hmm.
frictional vacancy, which means someone moves out, your cleaners go in, they repaint, refloor, they just do lipstick and makeup, and then boom, they can get it listed in 14 days. Well, that's half a month's rent you didn't get. The other vacancy is your normal amount of units that you have vacant, because the old rule is, if every single one of your units is rented, your rents aren't high enough. There's that concept that you should always have a unit where you're pushing that rent up. And then once you get that rent, then you start to bring all your other units up to that number. So that's how savvy property managers will test the market. They'll they'll keep 1 or 2 units empty. Now we're talking about hundreds of units in a complex, but
Right.
you can't do that with a quad. But generally, when you get to quads and tris and duplexes, it typically is just a price per unit, right? So if I
Hmm.
get a Cherokee Triangle, I know that it's going to be 150 to $200,000 a unit for twos and about a duplex and triplex, and it'll go be a little less for a fourplex. So and that they just kind of sell no matter what the rent is, they'll just kind of sell at that number because they know that the buyers know it's a good market and they can boost rents almost immediately because of such high demand.
Hmm.
But there is always that rub between contract rents and market rents. So when we
Hmm.
do an appraisal, we are to look at contract rents and market rents and adjust accordingly. Now, you can't just take all of your contract's rent up a couple $100 and stick that on the appraisal and turn it in because that's not actually what they're getting. And if you increase all your rents to market, then that vacancy number is going to go up, right? Because people are
Hmm.
going to move out. Then you've got to go in and refresh the unit and get people back in. So there is that. There's always that give and take, I guess, or push and pull, I guess, is the appropriate analogy. That push and pull on contract rents and market rents, but it becomes an exercise of income and expenses once you start to get to 8 to 12 units and above. I guess is really when income
Okay.
makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And ours was a sevenplex, one that I've had issues with. So I think, because one, two, three, and four, those units can be listed on the MLS and kind of considered more residential because maybe they'll be owner
Okay.
occupied. Once you get five and above, those are going to be commercial, cannot be listed on the residential
Okay.
MLS. So anywhere in there is probably where they're going to start asking for some of that information at
Yeah.
least. But last question that I have for you here, and then I'm going to let you share anything else maybe that we haven't
Sure.
covered on any of these topics that might be good for everybody to know. Let's dig in on value add just a little bit, what that means and what's included. If the property needs a new roof, like we talked about, that's a little bit more maintenance. It's not really adding value. If the HVAC systems are all about to go out, that's one of those non-sexy purchases that you have to make. Is that adding value? Or are we talking more flooring, kitchen, baths, windows? Everything else should be in as good condition as possible.
Yeah, I think we touched on it a little bit earlier that you've got to take care of your envelope of the property and your structural
Hmm.
issues no matter what. That's just a responsible property owner is going to do that because it increases the life of the building and it reduces expenses over time, right? So new windows have a cost, but there is some sort of return because they're lower bills, they're lower utility bills. A new roof is going to keep out water so because if you have a bunch of leaks, then your tenants are going to leave.
So those pieces aren't necessarily, they're not adding
Right.
value to the property. So when you see value add opportunity, those need to already be in reasonably good condition for
Right.
comparable properties. Because if you're going to go in, buy the property, and then they're expecting you to add more money in order to get to that pro forma number that they're sharing with you, then you don't want any additional expenses beyond
Or
that.
you got to take it off the purchase price, and that's just it has to be that way. You can't, and it only gets exploited when you've got higher and higher interest rates. At 3% interest rate, that is basically free money. If you think about it, it is a very low amount of interest that you're paying. But just a few points higher, 5 and 6%, that really starts to make a dent in your overall monthly expenses. So like we talked
Yeah.
about with houses, if you're now borrowing at 6 and 7%, there's probably not a lot of money left over on your monthly budget to fix things in the house when you move in, right? That's why people are saying, hey, like these things have to be fixed because 3 years ago this was an $1,800 payment and now it's a $3,500 payment. So there's a big, that really that's just everyday life. That's the actual when the rubber meets the road. That's how things
Yeah.
happen. So um, but yeah, if you're going to increase rent, then it is generally you're looking more at the cosmetic items because that's what tenants are going to see in the pictures. That's what they're going to see when they walk
Hmm.
through the property. And they actually expect that the maintenance is kept up on the building, right? and no one can escape it because everything has reviews now online. So, if you're a terrible property owner, everyone's going to know because it's going to be out on apartments.com or Yelp or whatever. So, you know, you can't really hide anymore. So, yeah, I think that's if you're looking to increase rents, make sure all of your maintenance items are taken care of first, and then start to look at the cosmetics, I guess, in that order.
hmm Well, Jason, anything else that you would like to share with everybody? Anything that we did not touch on today?
I would say that,
So we touched on a lot.
yeah, thank you. I can always talk. It's a superpower. So the interesting thing about real estate is that if I look at our MLS for all of Louisville in the last 10 years, the average sale price, the average list price and the median sale price have increased every year, regardless of COVID and all this other stuff. They've increased every single year, year over year. The interesting thing is inventory. We are starting to see the market beginning to correct a little bit. So, for instance, in kind of 2014 to 2019, the typical amount of inventory on the market at any given time was about 4 to 6 months, and so that was kind of what we considered a healthy market. And then in 2020, it was almost no inventory on the market; everything sold immediately. But we're now starting to creep back. So as of 2024, we're about right back at about 3.5 months worth of inventory. So we're starting to kind of get back to normal as far as you can actually go and look at a few houses on the weekend, have a couple days to decide, and then make your offer. It's no more, you've got to make an offer from
Depending
the
on the
car
house.
immediately. It's starting to correct.
Depending on the house.
So, and as interest rates hopefully start to slowly come down a little bit, it'll open up the market a little bit more.
I agree. That inventory may come off just as quickly if they do a price drop or interest rate drop pretty soon.
Right. Yeah. Because everything's driven on monthly payments. So, it's just like anything else, cars or houses or anything. So interest rates are a big impact on our economy.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining us today for all this valuable insight and information about what goes on the land of Oz behind the curtain on appraisals. Valuable information for homeowners, for flippers, for investors. Be careful what you do to your house. Make it nice. Keep up with the maintenance. Keep it pretty. Increase those rents, depending on which category you fall into. Hopefully, you'll take our advice, use it for your benefit, because real estate is some of your biggest financial assets out there, and you want them to produce revenue, and you want them to increase in value so that you can sell them for higher amounts and cash out on that later on in life. So, Jason, tell everybody how they can reach out to you, especially if they're in Kentucky, Indiana, or Ohio.
So we appraise in Kentucky and Indiana. I don't appraise in Ohio anymore. I'm sorry, but that's where I'm from. And I first got my appraiser's license, and I keep that license, but I don't appraise properties there. But I have a lot of great appraisers I know that I'll refer you to. So as far as Kentucky and Indiana, the best way to reach us is to go to our website, bellferris.com, Bell, and then Ferris, like Ferris Bueller or Ferris wheel, Ferris, bellferris.com, and go to the contact me page. And that's the fastest way that you can get in touch with me. You can always call. Our phone number is 502-883-0055, but I'm out of the office a lot. So I'm seeing emails faster than I'm seeing phone calls. So, and please, even if you have a question about real estate, I'm happy to help. Appraisers actually contact me from all over the country about short-term rentals, which is actually, Jonathan, how you and I got to know each other. So that's, so if you have questions about short-term rentals, I'd be happy to help as well. And, if I can't do the appraisal, I'll most of the time be able to get you to an appraiser I know that can help you out.
Thank you, Jason. That's very generous of you to offer that. And I'm Jonathan Klunk, your host at today's podcast. I could be reached at Top Louisville Agent on Instagram, Jonathan Klunk, Realtor on Facebook. So don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any short-term rental related questions or real estate questions, just as Jason said. So that's the pod. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with an extra exciting real estate topic with nuggets of information you can take and apply into your real estate business or into your life and the real estate that you own today to add value and to continue building wealth through real estate. Talk to you later.